Character and Courage is brought to you by the Bracken Agency, where our job is to help protect what's most important to you. Give us a call at 610-853-0990, and congratulations to Fran Dunphy on his induction into the LaSalle Hall of Fame.
When I think about the 68-69 team, I think a couple of years before that. I think when Bertie Williams and Stan Ladarchik and Larry Cannon obviously all got together as teammates, and then you added Ed Chesney and you added Roland Taylor and you added Kenny Durrett. That's when this thing all kind of came to be.
This LaSalle team had the ability to score like few others in Big Five history. Just about everybody on this team was capable of scoring a lot of points in any given day.
The 1968-69 LaSalle men's basketball program faced some real challenges back in the fall of 1968. LaSalle great former player Tom Gola had just accepted and actually pursued the head coaching position for that season. And that season in 68-69 had just followed a year where Jim Harding was the head coach, who was a disciplinarian, sort of a military type coach.
Jim Harding, who was a coach who recruited me out of high school. I knew who he was. I knew what he accentuated. He was a strict taskmaster. He was charming and brash and somewhat arrogant.
There were a lot of questions about the program at that point. And shortly after Tom Gold accepted the job, LaSalle learned that they were going to be placed on NCAA probation for some indiscretions that in today's world would not be as major, but back then they were.
Coach Harding, he took time out to embarrass some kids and who weren't really all that physically capable. He inherited some players, and I think he wanted to move some guys out.
From what I remember, there may have been a threat to take away a scholarship from Fran Scott based on performance, which is not allowable. I believe that Frank Dolson wrote an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer that revealed this, and when that happened, I think the NCAA took a closer look at what was going on. I'm not certain of the full extent of what they found, but unfortunately it was sufficient enough.
Part of the NCAA probation meant that LaSalle's team in 68-69 would not be allowed to postseason participation, meaning the NCAA tournament. So Tom Gola drew a line in the sand with his players. He said, if you feel sorry for yourselves, if you want to keep your heads down and sulk about the news that you are not going to be able to play in the NCAA probation, he said, you don't need to play for me this year. I respect that decision. But if you decide that you do, I want you to put a chip on your shoulder. I want you to take the probation as a means to be motivated and to pursue this season like none other in your life. And the character and the courage of that team was such that each one of those players took personal responsibility for making this a very special season for the seniors, many of whom were playing for their fourth coach in 4 years. The coach who had recruited them, Bob Walters, Joe Heyer, who coached them in their sophomore year, Jim Harding coached them in their junior year, and now Tom Gola was coming in to coach them in their senior year. The rest is history. Not only did those players accept that responsibility, but they had the character to take that challenge from Coach Tom Gola and carry it through one of the most magnificent seasons any team in the history of college basketball in Philadelphia ever had.
And if we look at the year before, when specifically I was a sophomore playing for Jim Harding, I'm watching all of this unfold, and I think Harding had a lot to do with our success in a specific way, in that we were disciplined like you can't believe with what to do defensively, footwork, the length of practices, and bouncing the ball, passing the ball, defending was what Jim Harding talked about so much. And then all of that discipline and fundamental work in one year, then it led to all this freedom the following year. It really couldn't have worked in reverse. It couldn't have had great freedom and then try to go into the discipline, the fundamental way. But the way it unfolded was the perfect scenario for us as a team. And Jim Harding was just one of those guys that no one really liked to play for, but here I am as a coach now, so many years later. I really respected and appreciated what it was that Jim Harding taught us. Not easy to play for, not great fun by any stretch, but as I look back on it, we were better for having been under Jim Harding's tutelage. And then when Tom Gola came in, that was just incredible what he allowed us to do. You had the right freedom on the offensive end, but there was a lot of attention paid to the defensive end as well. Gola had this way about him that he'd say, okay, now you're, like, for example, Larry Cannon, he had defensive assignments every 3-4 games that he was directly responsible for, and then they would rotate. Fatty Taylor most of the time had the best offensive players on the other team, but Bernie Williams had his chores to do on the defensive end as well. And Stanley was one of those guys that he and Fatty got the bulk of the defensive responsibility. So thinking that everything, as I watched it unfold from the time I was a sophomore through the time I was at the end of my junior year, when I watched these guys play and do all the things that they did, everything had its order that we had to go through. Gola was unbelievable in things that he allowed us to do on the offensive end. It wasn't like if you took a bad shot, then you were immediately taken out of the game, which would have happened under Jim Harding. It didn't allow for that offensive freedom. But Gola made you pay attention to the defensive end too. I think it was a really perfect way of coaching.
First of all, Tom Gola was a legend, not just to LaSalle, but to college basketball. When John Wooden was putting together his greatest teams that he ever saw, Tom Gola was always on that first five. And I remember having a conversation with John Wooden before he died, and I remember him saying that Tom Gola would always be his small forward. He would always be the greatest small forward that he ever saw. And that was some great players that were at the small forward position, like David Thompson, Bill Bradley from Princeton. And he always loved Tom because Tom could do so much more as a 6'6" player than he'd ever seen of a player that size. So Tom coming back to LaSalle was a national story, and it was right in the nick of time because we were suffering from that terrible probation from the NCAA. So Tom Gola coming in made everything right. It straightened everything out. It made life good again. Happy days are here again. Tom Gola's coming back. And there wasn't a better brand for LaSalle than when Tom Gola went here, and now he's coming back to coach. That Tom Gola was a LaSalle brand, that LaSalle had educated Tom Gola, was a terrific thing for the basketball program in the fall of 1968. And then, of course, the legendary story of how the team played under Tom. It was magic. It was Tom Gola coming in with gold dust.
I would say the way I've unfolded as a coach, I've taken a lot of that away from what Gola threw out there for us.
Coach Gola, needless to say, was diametrically different, but when he spoke, everybody listened. And we all knew that he was a common man, who accomplished uncommon feats in the basketball area. All the basketball pundits in Philadelphia, that he was acclaimed to be one of the best, if not the best, basketball players to come out of Philadelphia.
But Tom appreciated the kind of defense that Jim taught, but he took this team personally and said to them, you're going to play LaSalle kind of basketball now, challenging their manhood into playing the kind of game he wanted. He relaxed them enough, had them play their own game, so he got the best out of each individually. And in terms of the team play, well, maybe the best team ever out of Philadelphia.
So we had guys who had substantial egos, and he was telling them, he said, like, look, we need to subordinate our ego, we need to be selfless, and we need to blend ourselves together as a team. And if we don't do that, we're going to be in disarray. So he came in an untimely and in some circles unfair situation with a scandal, if you will, and sanctions, and he disregarded all that. And I think that he came to LaSalle because he wanted to redeem the school that he loved. At his measure of how to handle what we did, he didn't necessarily roll the ball out, but he had a feel for the DNA of our players, and he presumed that they were mature enough, which they were. All the guys were pretty mature at that time. And he also knew that they wanted to prove themselves, even though we lost the previous year in the first round, that they wanted to exceed those expectations, and he understood that, and we understood that. So I'd have to say that Tom's emergence from fundamental, strict disciplinarian, high-level taskmaster of Jim Harding to a kind of a seamless pro-style approach, in my view, was Camelot. He was a man who came into the environment as Camelot, although he never saw it that way. He was unpretentious, and he realized that his roots were from, he was a son of a police officer, his roots were from 3rd and Lindley in the city. And I think that was even more of an appealing attraction to him that he never would one-up you. I mean, he was like a quiet statesman and a dignified statesman, if you will, who was very unassuming, and we really appreciated that.
He was a guy that demanded certain things, but it wasn't a disciplined approach necessarily. It was, this is how life is. I'm going to give you something, but for that you need to give me something, and give your teammates and give the team something. And what he asked you to do was to give your best effort on the defensive end. And on offense, you were allowed to be who you were. So I thought that was a great way of looking at the game, great way of teaching the game.
When Tom Gola came, fatherly approach. Of course, they had great respect for Tom Gola for what he accomplished at LaSalle as one of the greatest college basketball players of all time, and from what he did with in the NBA as well. And you know, he wasn't all that far removed from his playing days. Gola could still play, so he could demonstrate personally.
Gola had a lot of other responsibilities, so it just wasn't LaSalle in those days. He wasn't on campus all day long. He was doing his other things for the city of Philadelphia at the time. So he needed some help. He needed Kurt Framo, who was very much a part of our coaching staff, and Kurt did a lot of the day-to-day operational things. And when Gola couldn't be there, Kurt took over. And Kurt wasn't a whole lot older than we were when he was teaching us, so it was not easy for him, but I thought he handled it with great class and dignity. He knew what buttons to push. Kurt was very, very good for us. Along with Kurt, we had Lefty Irvin, we had Eddie Altieri, we had Gene McDonald, who was our baseball coach, but would be around often. We were well taken care of, even when Tom Gola couldn't be there.
Larry Cannon, number 20. Well, Larry Cannon was a great high school player at Lincoln High School in Philadelphia. Larry looked like a weightlifter, just chiseled body, a prolific leaper, jump, could run, was really strong. Cannon could shoot from outside, he could drive, he was stronger than most guards, you know, at 6'5", 190, 195, very powerful. And Larry could jump over you, he could shoot over you, he could dribble past you, and I think, truth be told, what he probably liked best was passing.
I didn't know what he did in high school. People tell me about his heroics in high school. He was like scary in high school. But he was a 6'4" wing player who could play guard, play wing, and I'm not so sure he didn't have the most confidence of anybody on it. Nothing could shake Larry Cannon. Nothing. I mean, I don't care if you played at midnight on the Macadam in July. I don't care if you played in Madison Square Garden in front of 17,000 people. Nothing would rattle him. And he had this uncommon presence of fearlessness. He would go to the basket, he'd embrace physicality. He would take a jump shot from 18 feet. He put the ball on the floor against the press. He was, and I think as he said to me when he was here 2 weeks ago, I said, Larry, you led the ABA in scoring. He said, I did, Bill. But he said, that year I was 7th in the league in assists. I said, you really liked it? He said, I did. And he was. He could pass. He might have been our best passer.
Larry was a dominant guy physically, and he loved playing basketball, and he loved his team. He loved his teammates.
The team got together for the LaSalle portion of our celebration of that team that was being inducted into the Big Five Hall of Fame. I had the honor of introducing Larry Cannon, and in that introduction I told a story about Larry, and I'd asked Larry how we would have done against UCLA if we had played them, and Larry was very confident, which I thought was a strength of Larry's. Larry didn't flinch. Larry wasn't afraid of anything, not any opponent, not any team, not any coach. Larry was very poised and confident, and that's why Tom Gola was so good for Larry. I think Larry learned a lot from Tom. And I asked him how we would have done, and Larry mentioned the matchup problems UCLA would have. He said, we were rocking and rolling. We had the fast break that nobody could stop. We had the three-pronged guard attack, fast break. We would have beaten UCLA.
Bernie Williams,
the great shooting guard from DeMatha.
Bernie Williams was just a wonderful teammate as well, and had that great ability to make shots. He was a great athlete, and he was enthusiastic in everything that he did.
By the way, Bernie Williams, if there was a three-point shot, my goodness, God knows how many points he would have scored. He could hit from long range, and he, again, was really quick.
You know, Bernie's pedigree was that Bernie he was an All-American. He played in the highest profile high school game in that era, from DeMatha High School he was, and Lou Elciner was from Power Memorial, and they played a national high school game in Cole Fieldhouse in Maryland. It doesn't get any bigger than that.
And Roland Taylor.
Fatty Taylor, who came in from junior college.
Fatty was sort of the glue, in all honesty. I oftentimes had said it. We had 3 black guys on the team, but there was no color. We were brothers in basketball. That's who we were. And Fatty sort of made you be that. Even if you didn't want to, he made you be the best teammate that you could be. And I appreciated that about him. Along with that, he was a phenomenal defensive basketball player. When he needed to score, he did it. But mostly his thoughts were being a great point guard and giving it up to those guys that were good scorers.
Roland Taylor was a superb playmaker and a very good defender. When you think of Ken Durrett, Larry Cannon, Bernie Williams, Roland Taylor, all of whom played professionally, I think it was actually Roland Taylor that had the longest careers. At center, Stan Lodarczyk.
Stanley Lodarczyk was a guy who he was a lockdown defender, absolutely a lockdown defender. And I've oftentimes said that about him, that a couple years after Stanley played at LaSalle, we were blessed to have a guy by the name of Bobby Jones play in this city for the Philadelphia 76ers. And before there was Bobby Jones, there was Stanley Lodarczyk, the same kind of player. He could run like Bobby Jones. He could defend like Bobby Jones. And he didn't care who got the credit. He could care less about scoring and those kind of things, but he was a great rebounder and defender. Again, a very important piece to who we were.
A guy like Stan Lodarczyk at center was a very good rebounder and defender and could run.
Stanley was the Bobby Jones of his time. Franny and I always talk about Stanley. Kind of thick at 6'6", jump very well, moves pretty good, hands the size of close Connie Hawkins, came from a coal mining town in Monterey City. And he was a small town boy. But boy, he could defend. He could grab every rebound. Big hands. And again, didn't take any delight in his offense. Like if Stan averaged 5 shots a game, I'd be surprised. But would grab 7, 8, 9, 10 rebounds a game, would block 4, 5, 6 shots, didn't talk about anything. You know, Stanley, you cover the best big men that we have, Coach would say, and he would do it.
Ken Durrett.
Ken Durrett, who many feel was one of the best players ever to play in the Big Five.
Player. And Ken Durrett clearly was the most gifted athlete in the group.
And I still see him today. He's been deceased for at least 15 years now. A baby-faced, 6'7", naive, all-American high school player who had a fondness for the game. I think he knew how good he was at times. At other times, he had this unbridled energy, right? There's nothing he couldn't do. Not exaggerating. Sonny Hill and some of the pundits in the city, John Chaney, but they'll tell you the best player who came to Philadelphia to play was Ken Durrett. That was the consensus. He was a 6'7", play on the perimeter, could go inside, post you up. He could show you the ball and go to the baseline and dunk on you. He could bring the ball up against the press. He was really multi-skilled.
There's a great picture. It's 10 years after we were together as a team, and I think it says everything about everybody in that photo. We had all run out to half court to be introduced, and so there was sort of a semicircle. And the picture was taken from behind Kenny Durrett as he came out to join us, and he was the last person introduced. And the picture is over Durrett's shoulder, and everybody that was out there already was sort of cheering for Kenny Durrett as he came out. But there's a different look in everybody's eye. There was a reverence paid to Kenny Durrett. We revered him. And not only because he was a phenomenal basketball player, he was a tremendous guy. And he never cared about Kenny Durrett. It was always about the team as well, which made us really good. There was no egos there. And I give all of those guys credit because they honored the team always.
The players who didn't play a lot were all exceptional athletes and players that could have played for any other college basketball team. But here they were watching in the starting lineup 4 players who went on to play in the NBA, and a 5th, Stanley Lodarczyk, who was compared to a Bobby Jones in the NBA. Stanley Lodarchuk could have easily made it. So the players who weren't playing were complementary players. They were great team practice players. They got the first team ready to play. So that team was a cohesive unit. And for that basketball team in 68, 69, you have to know that most of those years were disappointing. Most of those years they underachieved from what people thought they were going to achieve when they came in as freshmen. Some of the freshmen left school. But Stanley, Lodarchuk, Bernie Williams, and Larry Cannon stayed, and then joined by Fatty Taylor. And I thought they were all part of that special mission of LaSalle. It went hand in glove. And the students certainly embraced it. The alumni embraced it. And it was just a terrific year, just sort of a special year in the history of athletics at LaSalle University.
Early in the season, we were playing Niagara, who the previous year had beat us at the Palestra. And we had to go up in the snow. It was snowing in this early December. We had to leave to go to Niagara. We had a Greyhound bus. We were going to leave at 4:30 in the afternoon, right in front of Worcester Hall. We were going to go to the airport. And it's 4:30, and Kurt Fromley, assistant coach, turns to Tom and said, "Tom, we got everybody here on the bus except we don't have Larry here." And he turned to the bus driver and he said, "Shut the door, we're going." And Fatty Taylor was sick. Fatty Taylor did not make this trip. And Calvin Murphy torched us for 50, at least 50 the year before, and we know he was in Niagara and they had Manny Leaks and they were good. So we said, okay, here we go. We go to the airport. We're sitting waiting for the airplane, and here comes Larry running with his bag, kind of puffing, maybe an hour and a half before the flight, and he sat down. Tom looked at him, and that was the end of it. We got on the plane, got into Niagara at like 7:30 at night, had a quick practice. The next day we had a training meal, which is probably 3-4 hours before the actual game, might have been 4 o'clock. And we're all sitting, eating in the middle of the dinner. Coach Gola gets up, and he says, he looks at Larry, and he said, "You know, Larry, you're not playing tonight." And Larry looked at him, got up, didn't say a word, stormed out, and the Holiday Inn where we stayed, they had a series of coat hangers on the left side, and where you'd put your coats. And he, with his left arm, just a broad sweep, came all the way across and knocked all the hangers down, left the room. And we thought to ourselves, we got issues here. Fatty's not here. Franny, Dump's gonna play the point. Now what have we got? So we're dressing, and here's Larry in the locker room, cheering us, clapping, encouraging us. And Chesney played. We had 5 guys and a sub. That was it.
But the things that I will remember about it, obviously Fatty not being able to play because he was sick, but Larry sitting on the bench and being the best teammate he could be. He didn't sulk. He didn't complain about the fact that he wasn't playing. He was coaching us as we came off the court. Important for us as a team to appreciate that, and I think we all did. Larry made his statement was, "It's not about me. It's about us. Yeah, I screwed up, and I should have been there for you, but we're going to be okay even without me playing." And I think that was a huge moment for us. Right
then and there, I think set the tone for the season in terms of that this team could accomplish much under adverse conditions, regardless of what happens. And we had 2 guys down. Guys responded. Larry responded, and he was nothing but a terrific leader the rest of the year. And the only blemish on our record was that one loss to South Carolina. But I think it helped us throughout the rest of the season too. I think it helped us, no question about it. We have to answer that question all the time when somebody says, "Well, you were on that 23-1 team," and the next question always is, "Who'd you lose to?" And it'll be forever etched in our minds who we lost to and how we lost it. And we just didn't play well enough. We just didn't get it done. And South Carolina deserved a lot of credit. They played well, and they got the job done that night. But I don't think it wasn't a huge blemish on our record. It was something that we always talk about, and I think it made us better throughout the rest of the season. The first thing he said to us in the locker room, he said, "It's my fault." He said, I made a mistake. I allowed them to play at their pace. Our pace was a 94-foot game. We should have extended them full court. We should have increased the pace of the game. I own this." That's what he said.
LaSalle Villanova maybe the greatest game in Big Five City Series history. Here are two teams, both ranked in the top 10. The best coaches in college basketball. Tom Gola with the LaSalle Explorers, Jack Kraft with the Villanova Wildcats, featuring Ken Durrett of LaSalle. Howard Porter was an intimidating force, and he was big and strong and could jump. So he was more of a true center than these Explorers had. You know, Johnny Jones on that Villanova team, and I mean they deserved their national ranking. Very, very good team. Even though the LaSalle team was a great one, I mean, this was no slam dunk for a victory. Both of these teams earned their top 10 national ranking. And wow, the Palestra, I watched on TV. Palestra was just electric. 9,208 was the capacity in those days. My goodness, they could have sold 2 and 3 times that number of tickets. There was so much demand for this game. It was much talked about, and it lived up to its billing, and it was a great game, and of course the Explorers won.
It was number 7 LaSalle against number 8 Villanova at the Palestra, which many have felt was the best, most exciting Big Five game in the Big Five 60-year history, won by LaSalle in a terrific finish and a great game. So some of those games really talk about the character of the team and their ability to beat good opponents. And then, of course, ending the year at Westchester, an unlikely place for a team of that magnitude, the number 2 team in the country, to play an away game at Westchester, where the team ended its season with a 15-game winning streak.
It was somber, not necessarily a funeral, but it was somber because we all knew that this was the last time we would be together as a team. That was important. Was it anticlimactic that we knew we weren't going farther and we knew we earned it and we should have? Sure. But again, the guys rose to a higher level. They didn't talk about it.
When you overcome adversity and you are successful, it's the tie that binds. It brings everybody together. If you didn't play really great teams and you didn't have a rivalry or you didn't overcome some difficulties during the season, you don't remember it quite as well. But in that year, we had great rivalries. We had great adversity, in all honesty. The biggest one, not being able to go anywhere at the end of the season. There's still that tie that binds because we were together as a team and we did it, overcame adversity. We all wanted to do it for each other.
The special part of that team was how well they got together right away, how they looked at one another and respected one another tremendously. And that's from the last player on the bench to the best players on the starting team. They just had a terrific kinship for one another. So their character, their courage, that's why that team, to me, was one of the most special teams of any sport that I ever saw.